Whenever anyone criticizes the notion of Ahruf or Qira'at and the Quranic variations it generally refers to, it is readily dismissed by apologists as a lack of understanding on the part of the critics. As we shall see in this video, no Muslim can say with any certainty what these terms actually mean. Muhammad's own companions were confused about the term Ahruf. Classical Muslim scholars and Islamic sources such as Al-Itqan, Ibn Sa'ad's Tabaqat, and many other books explain how it developed as a means to deal with a problem, and that problem was one of multiple Quranic texts, readings, and recitations. Terms such as Ahruf have over 30 definitions, and Islamic scholars record at least 50 different Qira'at, vocalization systems developed for Uthman's Quran. Even today, there are multiple views on the nature of Ahruf and how it relates to the Qira'at. Sometimes a distinction is made between the two, and other times they are conflated. According to a well-known Islamic organization, the Yaqeen Institute, link in the description box, an article last updated on July 1st, 2020, on the origins and variants of the Qira'at, it says, quote, "Yet one aspect of the Quran that continues to astound and puzzle researchers has been the fact that Quranic verses are recited in diverse modes of recitation, Qira'at." Evidence is taken from early Islamic sources and its scholars, not from the modern-day so-called scholars or apologists who explain it away as though they know what it means. Hadith literature such as Malik's Muwatta, Al-Musnad al-Kabir, and others make an attempt to explain what it may mean, but in reality all it does is cause further confusion and obfuscation. For example, Mishkat al-Masabih 238 says, Ibn Masud reported Allah's Messenger saying, "The Quran was sent down in 7 modes, Ahruf. Every verse in it has an external and an internal meaning, and every interdiction, punishment, has a source of reference." In Sahih Muslim 819, Ibn Abbas reported Muhammad saying, "Gabriel taught me to recite in one style. I replied to him and kept asking him to give more styles, till he reached 7 modes of recitation." Ibn Shihab said, "It has reached me that these 7 styles, Ahruf, are essentially one, not differing about what is permitted and what is forbidden." Sometimes confused with Qira'at, Ahruf is often translated as dialects for which the Quran was revealed to the 7 tribes of Arabia. These were Quraysh, Hudayl, Tamim, Hawazin, Thaqif, Kinana, and Yemen. However, according to Sahih al-Bukhari 4987, Ahruf was discontinued by order of the Caliph Uthman after he burnt other Qurans in favor of the Qurayshi dialect. This is confirmed in this hadith found in Sahih al-Bukhari 4984. Attested in Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah in his At-Turuq al-Hukmiyah, page 16, it says, "He, Uthman, transcribed the text, Suhuf, into a single codex, Mushaf Wahid. He arranged the chapters and he restricted the dialect Ahruf to the vernacular of the Quraysh on the plea that it had been sent down in their tongue." In Sahih Muslim 820, another tradition states that Ubay bin Ka'b recalled an occasion when Muhammad reported that Gabriel had one day informed him that Allah had commanded that the Quran be recited in only one dialect, to which Muhammad replied that his people were not capable of this. After some negotiation, the angel informed him that Allah had allowed the Muslims to recite the Quran in 7 different ways, Ahruf, and that each one would be correct. This incident caused Ubay to doubt the Quran, after which Muhammad goes on to hit him in his chest. To quote Ubay exactly, he says, ضرب في صدري. He, Muhammad, hit me in my chest. Confirmation is found in Sunan an-Nasai 941 that the various Quran readings caused confusion for Ubay, a senior companion and one of the few who knew the Quran the best. Narrated Ubay, I had no confusion in my mind from that time I embraced Islam except when I recited a verse and another man recited it differently. I said, the Messenger of Allah taught me this, and the other man said, the Messenger of Allah taught me too. So I went to the Prophet and said, O Prophet of Allah, did you not teach me such and such a verse? He said, yes. The other man said, did you not teach me such and such a verse? He said, yes. Jibreel, Gabriel, and Michael, peace be upon them, came to me, and Jibreel sat on my right, and Mikael on my left. Jibreel, peace be upon him, said, recite the Quran with one way of recitation. Mikael said, teach him more until there were 7 modes of recitation, each of which is good and sound. It was not only Ubay, but other senior companions of Muhammad were confused when the Quran was recited differently. For example, in Sahih al-Bukhari 2287, the same hadith is also found in Sahih Muslim 818, whereby Umar said, I heard Hisham bin Hakim bin Hizam reciting Surah Al-Furqan in a style different from that in which I used to recite it, and in which Allah's Messenger had taught me to recite it. I was about to dispute with him, but I delayed till he had finished that recitation. Then I caught hold of his cloak and brought him to the Messenger of Allah and said, Messenger of Allah, I heard this man reciting Surah Al-Furqan in a style different from the one in which you taught me to recite. Upon this the Messenger of Allah told me to leave him alone and asked him to recite. He then recited in the style in which I heard him recite it. The Messenger of Allah then said, thus was it sent down. He then told me to recite, and I recited it. And he said, thus was it sent down. The Quran was sent down in 7 dialects, Ahruf, so recite what seems easy therefrom. A Hadith in Nashr, Volume 1, page 21, as well as Al-Itqan, Volume 1, page 131, and Al-Musnad al-Kabir, amongst others, mention Uthman, the 3rd Caliph and compiler of the Quran, another close companion of Muhammad, asked those present at the Mosque of Medina if any of them had ever heard Muhammad say, quote, the Quran has been revealed to be recited in 7 Ahruf, whereby in response a huge number of them stood up and testified that they had heard this hadith. So, when apologists say to the critics of the Quran that they do not understand Arabic or the Islamic tradition, therefore they do not understand what Ahruf or Qira'at actually means, evidence from Islam's highest sources say major companions of Muhammad were also confused to the point they were arguing with one another. It caused doubt in their faith, at times getting physical and asking Muhammad to arbitrate, who also expressed violence. How is it that the closest companions of Muhammad, like Umar, Ubay, and Uthman, were unaware of the Quran being revealed in some other reading than that Muhammad had taught them? This contradicts the Quran, which directs Muhammad to convey and communicate each and every verse of the Quran, when it says in 567, O Messenger, convey everything revealed to you from your Lord. If you do not, then you have not delivered his message. Some deductions from the Hadith. Even if it is said that Muhammad could not speak to everyone, the report concerning Umar's shock at Hisham's recitation of Quran chapter 25 suggests what Hisham was reading was more than a dialect or an accent. Umar was wanting to get physical with Hisham, even if the most common answer to the word Ahruf to mean the various accents for the various tribes of Arabia is taken. The text of the Hadith itself negates this meaning, as both Umar and Hisham belonged to the Quraysh tribe, the dialect in which the Quran was standardized to. In addition, it was serious enough to cause Ubay to doubt his faith and the Quran, though he was supposed to know it the best. And Uthman, who collected the Quran, needed to ask others for confirmation, as he was unaware about the difference in reading and had tried to eliminate them in favor of one reading. The subject has caused major problems for the most senior of Muslim scholars, causing some to reject the hadith reports as they are a major source of embarrassment, though it comes from Islam's high sources. As explained in a previous video, anything embarrassing can and is often dismissed as unauthentic or at least unexplainable. Full references are provided in the book Islam the Honest Truth. For example, classical scholars such as Suyuti is not sure as to what Ahruf actually means. He cited 40 different interpretations of it in his treatise Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran, and after realizing its problem in Tanwir al-Hawalik, a commentary on the Muwatta of Imam Malik, he says that the hadith about Umar should be regarded among the Mutashabihat, something whose meaning is not known. Mullah Ali Qari said there were 41 definitions for Ahruf. Ibn Hibban states there are approximately 35 different opinions with regard to the understanding of the 7 different ways of Quran reading. Ibn Qutaybah recorded 35 opinions on the issue, and Ibn Sa'ad, a famous grammarian and reciter of the Quran, even declared that the true meaning of the term Ahruf is known only to Allah, and thus to attempt to investigate into this issue is futile. Ibn al-Arabi said there is no nas, meaning any text from Muhammad, or athar, any text from his companions, about what the 7 Ahruf actually mean, and because of this the scholars differed regarding it. Ibn al-Jazari, the scholar who was foremost in the subject and was instrumental in Quran recitation, Qira'at standardization, said about the 7 Ahruf hadith, and after studying it for over 30 years, he still did not understand it. He was confused about it, and that it was vague and ambiguous even for him. Ibn Taymiyyah said about it as Mas'ala Kabira, a big problem or issue. Even after all the scholars tried to understand the meaning of the hadith, they still could not fathom what it meant. Not knowing exactly what Ahruf is a significant issue and a huge problem, because the Quran is said to be revealed in 7 Ahruf. But if it is not known exactly what the term Ahruf refers to, then no one can say with any certainty exactly what the Quran is, or what the true meaning of its message is. From all this, if it's any consolation, at least it can be said that the classical scholars of Islam were honest when they did not know something, whereas the so-called Muslim scholars of today are apologists, either due to their insincerity or ignorance, as there is no third option, give the impression to the masses that they know what 7 Ahruf and the aforementioned hadith actually mean. If the foregoing hadiths are authentic, then at least it can be said that Muhammad allowed differences in how the Quran could be recited. If the hadiths are fabricated, it still indicates a situation where different versions of the Quran existed and there was a need to have their existence justified. Either way, both options indicate that within early Islam there were different versions of the Quran. Note that different dialects argument still does not answer the different versions of the Quran that were with the companions and early Muslims, some with missing verses, chapters, and completely different wording from one another, as explained in previous videos. The differences in early Qurans as mere dialects is not plausible, as it does not explain that books such as Kitab al-Masahif and Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran pictured here suggests that the Quran went through a long period in which distinctions in both the actual text were eliminated in the interest of obtaining a single text. For example, slide 210, English translation by Munir Farid, link in the description, is just one of many examples. It cites Quran 3:7, whereby Ubay's Quran had the words وَيَقُولُ الرَّاسِخُونَ and the well-grounded say. These additional wordings are missing from today's Quran. For the same verse, Ibn Mas'ud's Quran also had different wordings, وَإِن تَأْوِيلُهُ إِلَّا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, and its interpretation is except with Allah, whereas today's Quran reads, no one knows its interpretation except Allah. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. In part 1 and part 4 of these video series, Ubay and other prominent companions' Qurans differed from one another. For example, Ibn Mas'ud's Quran, according to Tirmidhi, had wordings different from other Muslims of the time. In Sahih al-Bukhari 4993, people were compiling and reciting the Quran in a different order. Al-Dhahabi, in his Alam al-Nubala, says the beginning of Quran chapter 105 was recited as Alif Lam Mim, as 3 separate letters, instead of Alam, do you not, of today's reading. He also mentions in Quran 1270 a word was read as Safina, boat, instead of today's reading of Siqaya, bowl. If Ahruf and Qira'at are not the same thing, a question that needs to be asked is, how did the 7 Ahruf become the 7 then eventual 10 Qira'at of the Quran? Notice so far, in the traditions, there is no mention of Qira'at, only Ahruf. This is why the terms Ahruf and Qira'at are often confused. Even amongst a scholarly class, there can be a conflation of the two terms. Not to mention that the vast majority of the Muslims are not able to distinguish the terms or even heard about them. So it is important to try and define the difference between Ahruf and Qira'at as it is generally understood by Muslim scholars and Orthodox Islam. The term Ahruf is a plural noun. Its singular is harf, meaning a letter. On the other hand, Qira'at means recitation, a term derived from the root verb qara'a, meaning to read. Therefore, the difference between the two terms, at least linguistically, is the difference between letters and recitation. Consequently, as a general rule, in terms of its application, the two terms are simplified thus. Ahruf are different Arabic dialects that was found in one Quran over another in ancient Arabia. The term Qira'at, for the most part, is a method standardized in the 10th century AD of pronunciation used in the various Quran recitations derived from synonyms or from differences in Arabic grammar. As an example, Quran 1:3, Maliki, king, according to Warsh Qira'at recitation. In the Hafs, it is Maliki, owner. So, it was not during Muhammad's time, nor from his companions. Rather, it was not until the 4th century of the Islamic calendar, this is 300 years after Muhammad, that an attempt was made to actually define what Qira'at actually meant. In other words, it was not until 322 of the Islamic calendar, or 934 AD, that the term the 7 different readings, Sab'a Qira'at, was properly defined. Ibn Mujahid took it upon himself to resolve this issue, as he sought to canonize the many different Quran variations that were in circulation at his time. He took upon this task because there was a problem of an astronomical proportion towards the Quranic texts and the many Quran readings. The reason why the terms Ahruf and Qira'at became conflated was because both terms were upheld with the prefix 7, Sab'a. Ibn Mujahid wrote many books and documented this in his famous as-sab'a, the seven, and elsewhere. His whittling down the Quran readings to specifically seven from the many Qurans may have been to reconcile it with Muhammad's traditions. Nonetheless, it came with much protestation and arguing, each area and Muslims criticizing the other's Quran and whose should be accepted as canonical. This is a problem that is not eliminated even today. However, he sought compromise by picking a reader Qari from every major center of the Muslim world. For Mecca, it was Ibn Kathir. For Damascus, it was Ibn Amr. For Basra, it was Abu Amr. For Medina, it was Nafi. From Kufa, he chose three readers, Asim, Hamza, and Al-Kisai. Each of the reciters Qari have a pair of student transmitters called Rawi, whose recitations curiously differed from one another as well as their own teacher Qari, thus creating further multiple recitations of the Quran. At any rate, Ibn Mujahid made reciting any of the now non-canonical qira'ats forbidden and punishable. Two major Quran readers or qaris were famously tried, punished, and imprisoned for reciting unacceptable variants. These were Ibn Miqsam in 934 and Ibn Shannabud in 935. Eventually, they were both forced to recant. Later, actually 400 years later, Ibn al-Jazari added three other readers to the list that Ibn Mujahid had collated. These were Abu Ja'far from Medina, Yaqub from Basra, and Khalaf from Kufa. For this to be made official, Ibn al-Jazari requested an official fatwa, legal ruling, from the jurist Ibn as-Subki to proclaim the tawatur, or the uninterrupted multiple chain transmission going back to Muhammad, of the 10 canonical readings, which he managed to get approved. However, 20 years later, Ibn al-Jazari reconsidered his earlier opinion and declared it fallacious. His revised position held that the 10 readings Qira'at were not transmitted through tawatur, but through sound single chains of transmission, khabar al-ahad, and others are based on the personal reasoning ijtihad of the reader Qari. If Uthman was supposed to have standardized the Quran to one, how did it eventually result in the so-called 10 canonical Qira'at, readings or vocalization systems of today? There is evidence from Islamic as well as manuscriptal evidence, some of this has already been shown, that there were numerous Quran versions in existence from Muhammad's time and after. Another reason is that the problem arose because the Kufic script in which the Quran was originally written contained no indication of vowels or diacritical points. On the right is an example from a page from the Quran in the Kufic style, Samarkand manuscript 8th century AD of Quran 15 verses 67 to 74. Due to having no dots or diacritics, a single word could be read in numerous ways, not to mention the errors in its reading, or at least the difficulty in reading the script because of the illegible, poor and archaic writing style. As an example, consider Quran 9:3. As Arabic is written right to left, the following verse from the Quran can easily be read in a faulty way. The word His Messenger is at the end of the sentence, circled in red. Allah is circled in blue. The pagans is circled in green. Due to no diacritics and the syntax of word placement, it can easily be read Rasulihi instead of Rasuluhu. If read in the former, then the meaning is Allah dissolves obligations with the pagans and His Messenger. This is what the skeletal text suggests, as His Messenger and the pagans are next to one another at the end of the sentence. In other words, the pagans and Muhammad are grouped together, seemingly being reprimanded by Allah. This is obviously blasphemous. Although his messenger is placed at the end of the sentence, and the skeletal text would seem to suggest the pagans and Muhammad are grouped together, especially with no diacritics. However, if the vowelization is changed to Rasuluhu, the meaning becomes Allah and His Messenger dissolved obligations with the pagans. Here, Allah and Muhammad are grouped together. The point is, the misreading of a skeletal text, albeit one sentence, or a slight word pronunciation difference due to vowelization can change the meaning of a verse completely. It is not the fault of the reader if words cannot be distinguished from the written text because there were no signs or accents indicating the correct pronunciation. Even if someone had memorized the correct version, mistakes can still occur as memory is not an imperfect system for transmission, which is why the Quran was written down even during Muhammad's time. As Allah and Muhammad had provided the scripture with a language that had not fully developed, human intervention was required to make the divine book clear and readable. This came in the form of Abu Aswad ad-Duali, explained in part 3. So the vague nature of the supposed script of Uthman's Quran allowed it to be read differently. Supposed because in the next video the claim the manuscripts are Uthmanic will be contended. At any rate, this resulted in possible variant readings of Qira'at, even for a single word in Uthman's Quran. When more and more Muslims, especially of non-Arab origin, including ignorant or illiterate Arabs, studied or memorized the Quran, faulty pronunciation and wrong readings began to increase. This resulted in variant readings of the Quran and the way in which the Quran was recited. The so-called Qira'at standardization was born to alleviate a problem. Essentially, it arose from the vagueness of the text and Muhammad allowing people to read it differently. The 10 accepted readers and then the more Quranic variations from their student transmitters makes the total to 30 different Arabic Qurans that exist today, as not every one of them is identical and are not all accepted as authentic depending on the viewpoint of one Quran over another. In part 3, the conflict between Hafs and Warsh was explained, the two most prevalent recitations of the Quran in the Muslim world. To the world at least, the rhetoric from Sunni Islamic view is that all of the authentic versions are all from Allah, sanctioned by Muhammad himself, and the differences between them are minute and harmonized. However, not all Islamic scholars hold this view, for whom it is unreasonable to think that the Quran can be recited in 10 different ways, then totaling to 30. For example, a very early and major Sunni classical scholar and Quranic commentator called at-Tabari held the view that the variant Qira'at readings were not of divine nature. On the contrary, their origin he attributed to the Quran readers and the transmitters themselves, meaning to their own selectivity and ijtihad deduction in reading and deciphering the Uthmanic consonantal outline, and not to Muhammad or Allah. At-Tabari makes an important point. Although the system is not without its flaws, Islamic sources always emphasize a chain of narration called isnad. This also applies to the Quran. In this way, the Qira'at is judged in the same way a hadith is judged for authenticity, meaning if there is a break from Muhammad or a character that is not reliable or dubious, it can cause the chain to collapse. The science of Qira'at seems to be a problem to fix the problem of various Qur'ans, and it was never fixed to the time of Muhammad, rather a science that developed some time after, then backdated to Muhammad, with a supposed chain authenticated back to him. Nonetheless, at-Tabari's criticism and rejection of some of the now established readings led many to label him as a deviant and have forced many Muslims to criticize him even today. For example, Labib as-Sa'id in his Difa' an al-Qira'at. Interestingly, it is not only at-Tabari who said that these readings are not tawatur. Prominent figures such as Ibn Mujahid himself said it was not. So did Ibn al-Arabi, Ibn Atiyah, Ibn al-Jazari, and the list goes on. According to Shia Islam, they reject the 7 Ahruf and 10 Qira'at tradition. Instead, they believe there is only one recitation of the Quran and that the different Qira'at comes from the readers and not from Allah. Therefore, it is not divine. For example, a classical Shia scholar Atusi says that the Quran was revealed only in one harf. Mir Ahmed Ali, in the Holy Quran Text, Translation and Commentary, page 58a, says, quote, Quran is one, came down from the one. The variation in recitation comes from the reciters, not from God. Professor of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University, Professor Shadi Hikmat Nasser, is honest in his research and scholarship. He says in Revisiting Ibn Mujahid's position on the 7 canonical readings, page 86, that early Muslims viewed the Qira'at of the 10 Quran readings as not all divine. On page 104, he says, quote, this situation is diametrically opposite to that of the later stagnant Qira'at culture, whose religious authorities generously labelled both scholars and the lay Muslims unbelievers when they challenged the validity of any Quranic reading. On page 105, he says, in time, as a result, the 7 and 10 canonical readings have successfully achieved a status of immunity against any doubt and criticism, transcending human law to become divine law itself. Professor Shadi says in the transmission of the variant readings of the Quran, the problem of tawatur and the emergence of shawaz, page 47, quote, two features generally characterize modern Arabic scholarship on Qira'at. First, it is apologetically concerned with defending the valid and divine nature of the canonical readings and consequently the integrity of the Quran. Second, it tries to establish a continuous tradition and a never before disputed consensus regarding the validity of the canonical readings, a consensus that goes back long before Ibn Mujahid. He continues and mentions that Ibn Mujahid selected a problematic person for the task called Hamza az-Zayyat, of whom scholars such as fellow Quran reciter Shu'bah considered his method of reading as an innovation or bid'ah, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal intensely disliked characteristics of his reading. Professor Shadi says on page 58, quote, it is crucial to realize here that the role of consensus has played in the canonization of the Quranic readings. Hamza's reading was able to move from the status of an innovation to that of divine revelation in less than 100 years. The professor continues in the same journal. On page 63, he says, Ibn Mujahid's decision to limit the canonical readings to 7 has caused unrest among Muslim scholars since the 4th century Islamic or 10th century AD. No one was certain of Ibn Mujahid's intentions. Did he intend at least subconsciously, to realize the number 7 for his selected readings and therefore retroactively vindicate or simply honor the prophetic tradition of the Sab'a Ahruf. Ibn al-Jazari clearly states that Ibn Mujahid's true intention was to make the 7 readings correspond to the Sab'a Ahruf and Uthman's 7 codices. On page 77, he says that the early Muslim scholars considered these variant readings of the Quran to be of human origin, but this position changed drastically in the later periods, especially after the 11th century AD, where the canonical readings started to be treated as divine revelation, that is, every single variant reading in the 7 and 10 eponymous readings was revealed by Allah to Muhammad. On pages 111 to 112, he says, "It is true that Ibn Mujahid had codified the 7 readings by the beginning of the 10th century AD, but the notion of the 7 canonical readings took some time to be established as canon. It's not until the 11th century AD that we see the notion of the 7 eponymous readings as an established canon." What all this proves is that not all Arabic versions of the Quran are identical, and how in time human errors crept into the writing, pronunciation, and collection in the transmission of the Quran. The evidence presented destroys the common Muslim adage, which goes something along the lines of, "The Quran has been preserved both in memory and in writing to the dot." The Arabic text we have today is identical to the text as it was revealed to the Prophet. Not even a single letter has yielded to corruption during the passage of the centuries, and so it will remain forever by the consent of Allah. This is clearly empty words that is contrary to all the evidence and of reality. An untruth repeated ad infinitum does not make it the truth. It still remains an untruth. The truth is, Ahruf or Qira'at came about because the Quran was never stagnant or a uniform text. It was constantly in a state of change, revision, addition, and deletion. Nor did it have anything to do with the revelation in the diversity of tribal dialects among the early Arabs. The feeble claim that it was revealed in 7 ways to make reading of the Quran easy on the people is nonsensical, as it is far better to have one Quran read in a way uniformly for all people to make it easy on the people. In fact, all these readings and variants have achieved is the opposite. It has caused confusion and disagreements. Most Muslims in the world do not know what the definition is. Even amongst the scholarly elite, arguments still rage on exactly what Ahruf and Qira'at actually are. Anyone appearing to know what it is and not being honest, as even the companions of Muhammad were not aware until they themselves started reading it differently. Muhammad seemingly did not teach his followers that the Quran could be read differently until this point, which shocked his own companions and made some of them doubt their faith. It has caused arguments and further confusion that endures to this day. So the conclusion, the definition of the terms Ahruf and Qira'at has been the subject of much scholarly discussion. The 7 Ahruf are not the same as the 7 Qira'at, which eventually became the 10. These terms came about because early Muslims did not recite the Quran in the same way. It was a problem, so Muhammad allowed Muslims to recite it differently. According to Islamic literature, curiously, Muhammad never mentioned the Quran was revealed in 7 Ahruf until his followers started to recite it differently. It was then justified that the revelation of the Quran was revealed in 7 Ahruf, and that made its recitation and memorization much easier for the various tribes. In reality, this was not the case, because there were attempts to unify the Quran into one reading by Uthman, and the more recently Saudi committee members have attempted to do so. In reality, the hadith literature related to the Quran revealed in 7 Ahruf indicate differences were more than just dialects. It caused major chaos and problems within the Muslim community. So much so, Uthman reduced it to the dialect of the Quraysh by destroying other versions. His goal was to remove the differences and unite the Muslim community around a single text recited in the Qurayshi dialect. Although tradition states that the 7 Ahruf was based on the dialect of the 7 tribes of ancient Arabia, this does not sufficiently answer pressing questions, such as how it caused doubt of faith amongst senior companions of Muhammad, how his companions did not know about it until they started reciting it differently, and how people of the same tribe and accent read it differently. The vague nature of the Arabic text allowed many Quran variants to arise. The science that is known as Qira'at came about because the Arabic script used in the 7th century AD consisted of very basic symbols which expressed only the consonantal structure of a word, and even that with much ambiguity and synonyms. Also, why would an almighty creator God of the universe limit his final and only true revelation on an obscure language that even its inhabitants could not agree upon? Even if he decided to broaden his divine book's language to incorporate the accent and dialects of the neighbouring tribes, why did Uthman go against Allah and Muhammad's wishes by burning these other Qurans? Early Muslim scholars did not understand what Ahruf actually meant, and with the prevalence of many Quran readings amongst the Muslims even by the 10th century AD, it had to be standardized further by Ibn Mujahid. It was around this time an attempt was made to actually define what the 7 different readings actually meant. In other words, it was over 300 years after Muhammad did scholars, more specifically fallible humans, determine, agree, argue, fight and seek to standardize the Quran according to the 7 readings or Qira'at, and it took a further 400 years to get it to the 10 canonical readings of today.